Okay, good morning. It's a pleasure to be here with you. We've worked very hard to get a diversity of people at this meeting. I'm pleased to see a lot of faces that I recognize, and I'm also pleased to see quite a few faces that I don't recognize, which is a very good sign in this context. I'd like to recognize my co-authors, Heinrich Scholdoff, Al Packenhol, and Joel Clement. Okay, so in looking at the challenges and the task, it is quite a daunting task at this point in our implementation of the ecosystem approach to management to really come up with challenges and tasks, because at this point in time the challenges are many and the tasks are even larger. We can look at them in three ways in terms of challenges involving communications, challenges in building a community of EA implementation, a community of people who are working to implement EA, and then looking at the problem of how we guide on objectives to attain the EA goal. We break the tasks out of that accordingly into developing a common language that allows us to communicate across industry sectors and across national boundaries. The task of having a periodic international EA conference, this has been called, as you saw in Heinrich's presentation, called for frequently in the language of the Arctic Council, but it has only occurred for the first time just now. And the problem, which is probably the most difficult among all of the tasks, and that is how do we reconcile conflicts across sectors and international boundaries as a task. You'll see these again. Okay, so I would say that the challenges for realizing the ecosystem approach in the Arctic, as elsewhere in the world, are definitely all variations on communications among the individuals who do this work on behalf of the nations and the people of the Arctic. So in looking at the Kiruna document, which is a ministerial level document, we find a number of challenges there, and certainly the strengthening the relationships within the Council and identifying a lead to assure coordination of a common approach to the work of the Arctic Council on ecosystem approach is important. Our ecosystem approach expert group was originally formed in PAIM and was solely looking at the marine environment within one work group in the Arctic Council. In September of last year, we were turned into a joint AMAP, CAP, and PAIM expert group. So we are attempting to coordinate and bring together the parts of the Arctic Council with regard to the implementation of the ecosystem approach to management in the Arctic. Are we the designated lead for this in the Arctic Council? The answer to that question is I don't know. It's not clear who is the lead here. And we are still learning our way in working with the other working groups, and working with CAP and with AMAP. We're pleased to have their participation in this meeting to continue that conversation. So one example of the challenge in implementing the ecosystem approach in the Arctic is just simply to look at the Arctic Council itself. Now, in the Arctic Council, you have 8 member states, eight nations. You also have 6 permanent participants who represent the indigenous peoples of the Arctic, and these 14 entities have a special status of leadership. But total, you have 46 organizations, governmental, intergovernmental organizations in the Arctic Council. There are a lot of voices here. You have 6 working groups. The working groups are held together by the chairs, the heads of delegation, and the chairs of these. And so the pieces, the participants, the other participants in the working groups don't necessarily get to talk to each other. So we have a lot of communication problems within the working groups, that is, challenges to sort out. And also the task force. We've already heard about one task force, the Task Force on Marine Cooperation. We have other task force. And then their relation to the expert groups within the working groups is another question. The Task Force on Arctic Marine Cooperation, as was pointed out earlier, is really focused on implementing the ecosystem approach to management in the Arctic and finding practical ways to do this. I participate in this to the extent that I review my national documents related to the task force. But as far as the formal connection between our expert group and the task force, there isn't it. Okay. Heinrich touched on this. This is in the Kiruna document in 2013. We have the challenge issued periodic Arctic Council review of the ecosystem approach to management in the Arctic, exchange information, and management experiences, highlighting examples from Arctic states. Pulling this meeting together was very difficult. This is not an easy thing to do, because we wanted to get managers, we wanted to get regulators, we wanted to get scientists of all stripes, but also, very importantly, we wanted to get the voices of indigenous peoples in the Arctic here. So it is a challenge for us to really pull together this kind of a meeting. So we are here. We are at least engaged in this task for the first time, and we have a number of things that we want to do at this conference. As I mentioned, at the end of the conference and the panel, we want to review the status of implementation in the Arctic. We want to share progress on the Arctic Integrated Ecosystem Assessments. This is a very challenging task. It involves a lot of different levels, a lot of government. It involves a lot of scientists and different types of scientists and people with different sorts of professional knowledge. We want to look at Arctic management experiences, and we will prepare a report to provide some guidance to the Arctic Council on where we are. But most importantly, if you really want to know who's responsible for implementing the ecosystem approach to management in the Arctic, you should look around. Look to the left, look to the right. This is it. This is the people in this room are the people who are active in implementing the ecosystem approach to management in the Arctic in various ways. If you had an abstract accepted here for a poster or a presentation, it was judged that you have you are making some contribution to implementing the ecosystem approach to management in the Arctic. We are, by coming together, we can share experiences, develop a community practice, and help advance the implementation. Okay, so here we have another Kiruna challenge, and this is obviously from the level of the ministerial level, because they're always calling for overarching goals of some kind. So this is an overarching EBM goal, and I'm not really sure what that means. But since I'm not really sure what that means, I get to say what it means. So going through the documents, if you look at the goals that are out there in the Arctic Council and you distill them, this seems to me, what I've written here, and you can see this seems to me to be pretty much what everyone agrees to and what occurs over and over again, probably said in different words than you may have seen expressed in the past. But we're talking about protecting the function of the ecosystem. We're talking about protecting the plant and animal communities. We're also talking about protecting the way of life, the cultural practices of indigenous people in the Arctic. Okay, so I want to be the first person to put a picture of the crystal serenity up here. So I did it. I got it. because to have a ship that's 120 feet long, that's got a passenger capacity of 1,070 people, to show up in Nome on its way to New York City. In the past, you might have thought they were lost, but no, they aren't lost. And if this goes well, there'll be a lot more like them up there floating around in the Arctic. And so developing the guidance for achieving this overarching EA goal by sector, that's where it gets tough. People will generally agree, and people do at very high levels, and within nations we have legislation that protecting the sustainable uses of the Arctic, the behaving in ways that conform to that, is something that everybody should do. But then when you start looking at the details of implementation, there is a study that came from within Payne. And the probability of a ship-based oil spill in the waters of the Chukchi and the Beaufort and elsewhere that the Serenity is traveling in the next 20 years is pretty close to 1. Okay? And once you get oil in the Arctic environment, it stays there for a long, long time. We have lots of very good research to indicate that. So, is that compatible with sustainable use? Is that compatible with the protection of indigenous practice and culture? That's a good question. So this is where, when you start trying to reconcile objectives, where you run into the really tough sledding. So back to the review of the challenges and tasks. Clearly, I think that developing the guiding principles and communicating these, as the point was made earlier, up to the council, getting them to accept these things and then propagate them back to us in the forms of directives, that's the real challenge. Because I have indicated that reconciling the conflicts across sectors is going to be the tough part. In session 6, we'll be looking at these issues. Panel discussion, I encourage everyone to be engaged in that. That is the sort of the conclusion of our meeting here and one of the main purposes for it. And I mentioned that the abstracts are linked on the agenda. And then just a couple of points about the 6 elements of the ecosystem approach to management. There are a number of frameworks around, and mostly quite a bit more detailed than this, and you'll hear some of them during the presentations today and tomorrow. These are abstractions, but they are a useful tool if you're trying to look at the status of implementation of the ecosystem approach to management in the Arctic. These are the types of benchmarks, if you will, that you can use to evaluate the status. For example, in identifying the ecosystem, have we identified the ecosystem? Why, yes, we have. The Arctic Council has adopted large marine ecosystems. They've said, this is what an ecosystem is. Okay, so we're done with that, pretty much. There are other things to do. Describing the ecosystem, we have a lot of really good research out there, and it's improving. Do we have holes? Yes, we do. And those need to be identified, and that's the purpose of integrated ecosystem assessment, is to fill the holes. Ecological objectives. Nationally, we have a lot of good-sounding ecological objectives for protecting the environment. But as you start propagating these national ecological objectives down to the ground and trying to get to specific regulatory ecological objectives, for example, how many tons of cod are you going to take out of the Barents Sea, which is about as basic an ecological objective as you can get. There are some differences between the nations and among the nations. So with that, we've already talked a little bit more about this, so I think that's pretty much the end. Thank you.